I wish the best for your son, and I wish you good health, and your case is dismissed.
Judge Frank Caprio seemed like America's sweetest grandfather. His courtroom show made millions cry with joy. But in November 2023, everything changed. A devastating diagnosis hit him just as his family discovered something shocking about his years on the bench. Critics had been whispering for months about what really happened behind the cameras. His son David knew the truth, but stayed silent. The final months revealed secrets that made his cancer battle look easy. What his family found in his private files will break your heart. He was born on November 24, 1936, in a freezing tenement on Federal Hill in Providence, Rhode Island. They called it a cold water flat because there was no hot running water. Just a pot-bellied stove for heat, oven door cracked open for extra warmth, and trips across the street to the public bathhouse to get a hot shower. Frank Caprio was the second of 3 boys, raised by Antonio and Filomena Caprio, who didn't have much, but somehow made that cramped apartment feel full of love. They didn't measure wealth by things. They measured it by togetherness. That warmth held the family close through bitter winters and harder days. His father, Antonio, came from Teano, Italy, with a 7th grade education and no money. To keep the family afloat during the Depression, he sold fruit door to door from a wooden cart and delivered milk all over the city. He'd wake Frank and his brother at 4 a.m. to help on the milk route, telling them, "If you don't want to do this forever, stay in school." He refused to stop delivering milk to families with kids, even if they couldn't pay. He just covered the cost himself. And somehow, after years of hard labor, he taught himself psychology and became a published author. His mother, Filomena, born to Neapolitan immigrants, was the quiet hero. She never ate at a restaurant, never bought herself a dress unless it was absolutely necessary. She skipped prenatal care just to save a few dollars. Yet she was known across the neighborhood for helping others, even when they had barely enough for themselves. In 2018, Frank named his charitable foundation after her, the Filomena Fund, to honor that spirit of giving. At age 10, Frank Caprio started shining shoes on the sidewalks of Federal Hill. For nickels and dimes, he polished the scuffed leather of men who'd lost their jobs, fathers struggling to feed their kids, immigrants who didn't speak English. He listened more than he spoke, heard stories of pain, pride, and perseverance. He also delivered newspapers before sunrise, even in the snow. No shortcuts, no complaints. He learned early that work wasn't something to escape. It was something that built dignity. By his teenage years, he was juggling 3 jobs: washing dishes in diners, delivering papers, and helping his father deliver milk before dawn. Even with blistered hands and no sleep, he showed up to school and wrestled his way to the Rhode Island State Championship in 1953. At Providence College, he kept the same grind going. He cleaned cars, worked Sunday 2 a.m. shifts, assembling newspapers at the Providence Journal, and paid every dollar of tuition himself. He graduated in 1958 with a Bachelor of Science degree. At the ceremony, his father cried. The man who delivered milk in silence watched his son earn what he never could. Frank then started teaching American government at Hope High School. He loved it, but he wanted more. He wanted to practice law, but he couldn't afford to quit teaching, so he came up with a brutal plan. Every day, after school let out at 3:30, he drove 50 miles to Suffolk University Law School in Boston. He attended night classes, came back home after 10 p.m., slept a little, and got up again to teach. He did that for 7 years. He finally graduated in 1965 with a law degree, becoming the first professional in his family. While in law school, he worked as a legal clerk in Providence. The files he handled weren't glamorous: petty theft, parking violations, broken families, people struggling just to live. He read their stories late into the night, stories that stayed with him. The law wasn't just a system to him, it was a mirror of people's real lives. In 1965, at 28, he opened his own firm, Caprio and Caprio, on the exact land where his mother and aunts had once lived. His sons, Frank Jr. and David, would later join him there, along with cousin Anthony. The building wasn't just an office. It was a full-circle moment, but his public life had already begun. In 1962, at just 25, he defeated a powerful longtime incumbent to win a seat on the Providence City Council, representing the same neighborhood where he shined shoes. His speeches were fiery, his energy relentless. During one of his campaigns in 1966, a street brawl broke out between nearly 400 supporters and had to be broken up by 25 policemen. Still, Frank won re-election. He ran for lieutenant governor in 1968, then for attorney general in 1970, earning 43.3% of the vote against a Republican opponent. He didn't win that race, but he wasn't done. Even before his legal career took off, Caprio had already served 8 years in the U.S. Army Reserve and Rhode Island National Guard as part of the 876th Combat Engineer Battalion. He started in 1954, training at Camp Varnum and Fort Indiantown Gap. He credited that service with helping form his moral compass, something that would define him in the courtroom later. He never missed a veterans event, even in his final years battling pancreatic cancer. Through all this, wrestling remained a part of his story. After his 1953 championship win at Central High School, he returned to coach at Hope High, the same school where he taught. He was teaching, coaching, and attending law school at the same time. Wrestling gave him something deeper than strength. It taught him discipline, fairness, and how to keep going when the odds weren't in your favor. He knew what it felt like to start at the bottom. And that's why, when people came into his courtroom decades later, broke, scared, ashamed, he didn't see criminals. He saw humans. And he remembered the shoe shiner who used to kneel on cold sidewalks in Providence, listening to stories from people just trying to survive. That boy never left him. At 25, Frank Caprio stunned everyone when he won a seat on the Providence City Council, defeating a long-serving council president in 1962. He wasn't a polished politician. He was just a kid from Federal Hill who believed in listening more than talking. His campaign was rooted in the neighborhood where he grew up, close enough that you could smell the same bakery his mother used to walk by every morning. And when he opened his law office years later in the Caprio building, it stood on the very ground where his mother and aunts once lived, just a few hundred feet from his childhood home. Everything stayed close. By the time he was 49, he had built a thriving law practice. But then, something shifted. In 1985, Mayor Joseph Paulino Jr. offered him a seat on the Providence Municipal Court. Frank took it. That bench would become his home for the next 38 years. Nobody expected what would come next. When he was quietly promoted to chief judge around 1990, most assumed he'd run things the old way. But he didn't. He rearranged court schedules so that people didn't have to skip work to fight a parking ticket. He asked questions, real ones, not to trap people, but to understand them. He let people talk. Some broke down. Others brought their kids. A woman with cancer. A man sleeping in his car. He didn't rush them. He listened. One of those stories came in November 2020. Tisha Miller showed up in court with her little girl Jemiah, barely holding it together. She was homeless, living in her car, trying to survive with fibromyalgia while raising her daughter. She had parked where she wasn't allowed, Because where do you park when you live in your vehicle? Caprio dropped the charges. But then he paused. He said he wanted to do more. And he handed her $50 from something called the Philomena Fund. Miller froze. Her eyes filled. "Your Honor, you know I don't have a dollar to my name? I really thank you for that. I really do. You don't understand." But he did. That fund, Philomena, it started small. In 2018, Angie Chesser, a single mother from Indiana, sent in $25 after watching his show, Caught in Providence. She asked him to give it to another mother who needed it. Caprio used it to help a woman in crisis. Then more letters came. Then dozens more. $25 from Roberta Jacobs in New Orleans. $50 from David Sotawand in New York. They gave what they could, trusting Caprio to pass it forward. And he did. Over and over again. All in the name of his mother, Philomena, who never stopped helping her neighbors even when they had nothing. He didn't just change one courtroom, he changed the whole tone. In 1992, a college student stood before him, fined $500 for jaywalking while trying to get to a job interview. He was broke. Caprio wiped the fine clean. People called it controversial, but he didn't care. "I saw someone trying," he said. That case rewrote how people talked about discretion, about kindness in law. The same thing happened in 2005, when an 82-year-old widow explained she'd parked illegally after coming back from her husband's funeral. Her savings were gone. Caprio told her story out loud and dismissed the fine. Sometimes a parking ticket was about more than just parking. By the mid-1990s, he had written a policy few courts had seen before. Every case file now had to include notes on the person's life, job status, health, family, struggles. He wasn't just counting offenses. He was searching for the story behind them. One man kept getting speeding tickets. Caprio discovered he was battling alcoholism in secret. Instead of fines, he got him help. Over time, repeat offenses dropped 30%. That shift, seeing people, not just papers, spread to other courts across the country. When the 2010 recession hit, the court overflowed. Jobs disappeared. Bills piled up. Caprio went home every night with 50 new files to read. One man walked 5 miles to court. He had 92 cents to his name. Caprio covered the fine himself and made sure the man got a ride home. In those days, people didn't call him judge. They called him the people's judge. Back in 1988, long before cameras captured his courtroom, a woman stood before him terrified. She had broken the law. But as she spoke, Caprio saw the bruises in her words. She was being abused. He didn't punish her. He got her help. That became the blueprint. Case after case, year after year, he built something different, something better. In 1995, something strange started happening on late-night public access TV in Providence. It was grainy footage from inside a small courtroom. No actors, no scripts, just Judge Frank Caprio, a steady voice behind the bench, and people from the neighborhood explaining why they ran a red light or parked too close to a hydrant. The man behind the camera was his brother Joseph. He thought maybe people would watch, maybe not. Then, one night, a guy came in and said he missed a red light because aliens abducted him. Nobody blinked. The audience? They lit up. Over 1,000 calls came in. Some laughed, some were angry. Some questioned whether this was even legal to air, but something about it stuck. By 2000, Caught in Providence had moved from midnight cable to ABC affiliate WLN, where it aired on Saturday nights. A local experiment was turning into something bigger. Then, in 2002, the courtroom grew silent as a man named Daniel Murray stood before the judge. He was a single dad, fined for parking while buying baby formula. He had 92 cents in his account. He had walked 5 miles from East Providence to be in court. Caprio didn't ask many questions. He quietly reached into his pocket and pulled out $250 from a fund he named after his mother, the Philomena Fund. He paid the fine himself. Then he told Daniel to pay it forward someday. The episode went national. WLNE's ratings jumped 50% overnight. Suddenly, it wasn't just a show. It was something else. In 2007, a man appeared, eyes low, voice shaking. He had stolen groceries, not for himself, but for his starving pets. He'd lost his job, was sleeping in his car. He didn't want to eat if his dogs couldn't eat. Caprio didn't lecture him. He gave him community service. No fine. The footage came from a hidden camera. It was raw. Viewers cried. Caprio didn't say much. He just nodded and moved on. But the internet didn't forget. This was who he was. By 2010, Caught in Providence had gone national, syndicated across the U.S. One episode that year stirred a different kind of buzz. A defendant who looked uncannily like a well-known celebrity stood before the judge. The cameras didn't miss it. Viewers wondered, was the judge swayed? Was justice turning into entertainment? Arguments broke out online, but people kept watching. Ratings didn't drop, they spiked. Caprio had become more than a judge. He was a figure people debated at dinner tables. Then came 2016, a moment that would change everything. A 96-year-old man named Victor Cueva came to court for a speeding ticket. He looked fragile, but his story hit hard. He had been driving his 63-year-old son to cancer treatment and didn't want to be late. He never drove, but that day, he had to. Caprio listened, then said, "You are a good man. You really are what America is all about." That clip spread like wildfire. Over 50 million views. No music, no effects, just truth. The world saw it and paused. A father taking care of his son, a judge who understood. That moment defined Frank Caprio for millions who'd never even heard of Providence before. In 2018, TikTok found him. A woman stood before Caprio and blamed her unpaid fines on cursed jewelry. It sounded ridiculous. Caprio raised an eyebrow, but then she said she was fleeing domestic abuse. She had nothing but her jewelry and a few bags. No home, no help. Caprio dropped the fines. Then he offered her shelter contacts, resources, support. That video reached over 100 million impressions in days. People didn't just watch it. They shared it. They talked about it. They started seeing court as more than a punishment chamber. By 2019, the show had partnered with Facebook Watch. Over 2 billion views came in by 2023. But it wasn't the cameras or platforms that kept people hooked. It was the way Caprio looked people in the eye. In 2020, during the height of the pandemic, a nurse stood before him, ticketed for running a red light. She had just finished a 16-hour double shift. She was tired. She didn't even realize what she'd done. Caprio talked to his officers, dismissed the ticket, then thanked her. The clip spread fast. Frontline workers saw it as a tribute. Everyday people saw it as hope. But 2021 wasn't all applause. That year, a clip went viral showing Caprio being lenient toward a repeat offender caught stealing. The man had a gambling addiction. Social media turned. Critics said Caprio was going soft, too forgiving, too naive. But then news broke that Caprio had secretly funded the man's rehab. No cameras, no press release, just quiet action. The same critics came back with apologies. That moment reminded everyone watching that justice wasn't just about punishment. It was also about repair. Then, in February 2025, Caprio released Compassion in the Court, a book filled with 50 untold stories from his bench. One story stood out: a 2015 case involving a homeless veteran who got a parking ticket. But the ticket was just the surface. Underneath it was untreated PTSD, lost paperwork, missed VA appointments. Caprio helped him apply for benefits, connected him to the right people. The fine was erased. His life started to rebuild. The book wasn't just a memoir, it was a map of what justice could look like if it had a heart. In 1965, Frank Caprio married Joyce, and nothing in his life was ever the same. He had met her during a whirlwind courtship in Providence's Italian-American neighborhood, and once they were together, they never drifted apart. For more than 60 years, Joyce sat quietly in the background of Frank's life, sometimes in the court gallery, sometimes in the audience of his speeches, but always close enough for him to feel her presence. She rarely spoke to the press, rarely sought attention. But Frank spoke of her often. He called her the incredible woman who gave him the greatest gift of all, their 5 children. And when he said it, he meant it. They raised their family in Federal Hill, where dinner wasn't just about food, but about listening. Their table became a small courtroom of its own, filled with lessons about justice, kindness, and the importance of hearing someone out. The children, Frank T., David, John, Paul, and Marissa, grew up hearing stories about defendants who had made mistakes but were given a second chance. They saw their father shine shoes, wash dishes, put himself through school. They saw their mother keep the family stable, especially when politics made life uncertain. Years later, one of their sons, David, would help turn those stories into something much bigger. Millions of people would watch Caught in Providence, but the values behind it started at home. Joyce protected that home fiercely. In the 1960s, when Frank was a city councilor, he was offered bribes more than once. Joyce made sure he didn't take them. She watched the books, kept things clean, made sure their family's name was something their kids could carry with pride. She didn't raise her voice, but she didn't need to. Her strength was the kind that held things up without being seen. When things got hard, and they did, she reminded him who he was. Frank was a wrestler in high school. He won a state title in 1953, and he never let go of that part of himself. Even in his 80s, he was still wrestling with his grandkids, playfully pinning them on weekends and telling them stories about his courtroom. Not just funny stories, but real ones, about people who were struggling and the decisions that had to be made. His granddaughter, Sophia, remembered how he would lean in and tell them gently to always stay close to their friends and to be kind. These weren't just visits, they were lessons. They were legacy. Not every day was easy. In the 1990s, Frank dismissed a case. Days later, the defendant took their own life. He couldn't sleep after that. He'd lie awake at night, turning the decision over in his mind. He talked to David. Eventually, the family went to therapy together. They talked about the weight of being someone who had to judge. Frank didn't hide behind his robe. He admitted when things hurt. He showed his children, and then their children, that strength didn't mean hiding emotion. It meant facing it. Frank served as chairman of the Rhode Island Board of Governors for Higher Education from 1990 to 1998. He never forgot what it felt like to struggle. He worked nights, pushed himself through law school, and once he had power, he used it to help others do the same. He approved over $50 million in scholarships for low-income students. In 1995, he launched a grant program for kids from Federal Hill, his own backyard. Enrollment among low-income students rose 25% during his first 5 years. By the end of that decade, his efforts had reached a quarter of the state's Pell Grant recipients. Hundreds of students got their shot because he remembered what it was like to have none. In 2000, he created the Frank Caprio Scholarship Fund. Every year, it gave away $100,000 to students in wrestling and legal aid, 2 things that defined him. One kid from Central High had almost been arrested for stealing sports gear. He got the scholarship, cleared his record, went to college, and came back as a counselor to help other teens stay out of trouble. That story wasn't rare. In its first 10 years, the fund helped more than 120 kids. It wasn't about charity. It was about belief, believing people could change, believing that second chances matter. Caprio was inducted into the Rhode Island Heritage Hall of Fame in 2021. He should have felt pure pride, but there was pain too. In 2005, a city council colleague he trusted was convicted in a bribery scandal. Frank had worked beside him. He was heartbroken. He held a private memorial for the man and then pushed for stricter ethics training, reforms that led to a new state code in 2006. He didn't run from it. He faced it, fixed what he could, and kept going. When he was honored that night in 2021, all 5 of his children were there, including 2 who had gone into public service. He had taught them not just to rise, but to rise with integrity. In 2015, he stood before lawmakers and gave one of his most powerful testimonies. A report had come out showing how minor court fines were ruining families. One parking ticket, one missed date, and suddenly people were losing jobs or facing eviction. Frank had seen it. He called for empathy training for judges. Within 6 months, a new law was passed. Fines couldn't go above 10% of a family's income. Every judge had to take empathy workshops. The change was real. In the first year alone, hardship fines dropped 47%. That was Frank Caprio. He didn't talk about justice. He made it feel human. He retired in October 2023. The city renamed his courtroom the Chief Judge Frank Caprio Courtroom. The ceremony on October 20th brought together 300 people, former defendants, reporters, city officials. He didn't leave quietly. Even as a retired judge, he helped push through a 2024 bill that cut fines in half for low-income first-time offenders. More than 1,500 people felt the relief. His farewell courtroom video went viral, 2 million views in 48 hours. In it, he thanked his staff one by one. The world watched as a man left the bench with no bitterness, only grace. But just before that, on November 2023, Frank was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. He shared it publicly a few weeks later, right before his 87th birthday. He called it insidious. He didn't sugarcoat it. He started chemotherapy and radiation almost immediately, splitting time between Baptist Health, South Florida, and Dana-Farber in Boston. His video on December 6th asked for prayers. His face looked tired, but he smiled anyway. His family stayed close. The public stayed closer. By May 2024, he'd finished 6 months of chemo and 5 radiation sessions. He rang the bell of healing at the hospital as staff clapped. They played "Happy Days Are Here Again." Someone handed him a gold ribbon-wrapped gavel. He laughed, called it a milestone of hope. His energy was low, but his spirit wasn't. That smile lit up the room. Still, the disease didn't go away. He kept pushing through fatigue and fear, holding on to his optimism for as long as he could. In August 2025, the pain grew worse. He recorded a final video from his hospital bed. His voice was slower, but his message was clear. He thanked everyone who had supported him. He said he prayed for peace. And then, surrounded by Joyce and the 5 children they'd raised together, he passed away on August 20th, 2025, at age 88. His last social media post went up hours before his death. A farewell and a final request for prayer. After he was gone, over 1 million people left condolences online. His funeral was streamed worldwide. Former defendants spoke about how he'd changed their lives. Caught in Providence had passed 1 billion views by then. His book had become a teaching tool in law schools. Judges, politicians, ordinary people all said the same thing. He made justice kind. About 30% of his cases ended in leniency, not because he was soft, but because he believed in stories over rules.